How do memoirs reveal our culture's concept of transformation and spiritual transformation in this life? Can they be considered as secular mysticisms? And how can the church function as a place of ministry in the midst of this cultural moment? Well, these are some of the questions that Andrew Root tackles in his new book. Let me tell you what I thought. Welcome to Books and Big Ideas, what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about, with Joel Wentz. Okay, I have here the sixth and supposedly final, I think it really is going to be the final book in the Ministry in a Secular Age series from Andy Root and Baker Academic. Thank you to Baker for sending me a copy of this. This is my honest review of this book. So let me tell you about it in my typical format of the main idea, the research behind it, the readability of it, and my reaction to the book. Okay, so if you followed me for any length of time, you'll know that I'm a big fan of Andy Root's work. I've read the whole Ministry in a Secular Age series. I loved every book. I've reviewed them. I even had a conversation with Andy, and I'm actually going to have a conversation with Andy on this new one soon, which I'm excited about. So just get this out of the way. I love all these books, and this one's no exception. I love this book. So this review is going to be a little bit more about why I loved it and what kind of specifically is this one about. Okay, so the main idea of the church in an age of secular mysticisms is he makes a few arguments in this book. First of all, he kind of defines what a secular mysticism is, and he talks openly about, he interacts with Charles Taylor through all the books on some level, and then with other books he interacts more specifically with specific thinkers like Hartmut Rosa, for example, in an earlier section. This book he interacts quite a bit with the German Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han, who wrote the Burnout Society and some other texts regarding the competition latent in our neoliberal age and in our economy and all of that stuff. So that he kind of brings Han into the conversation with Taylor and with secularism and all of that. And so what Andy is kind of turning his sights on in this book is diagnosing our kind of cultural fascination with transformation, and what forms does transformation take in a culture that is in the imminent frame of Charles Taylor's secular age? So how do you wrestle with the idea of transformation when you have collapsed anything transcendent? There's no divine. There's no divine source of transformation. What then does transformation look like in a secular age? Hence the understanding of a secular mysticism. So preserving the mystical notion of transformation, which, for most centuries previous to the modern age, had to do with the divine. Preserving the idea of mysticism, but collapsed into a secular form. What does that look like? That's a lot of Andy's argument here. And what he did was he surveyed a ton of memoirs. And so what he does in this book, and this is all under kind of the main idea still, what he does in this book is he plots out on a triangle, he plots out the three axes of kind of what transformation looks like in our culture. He labels, I'm not going to go into too much in the weeds on this, but it's helpful to have this in your mind as you think about the main idea of the book. He plots on this triangle, the top point of the triangle are the beyonders, or those who preserve a sense of the transcendent, and then the bottom 2 points on the triangle are different reactions to the secular age and the idea of transformation. One angle are the exclusive humanists, who embrace the modern moral order of Charles Taylor's work and talk about transformation being kind of more of an discovering your inner self within that modern moral order. And then on the other side are the counter-enlightenment thinkers, which in a Nietzschean kind of way rebel against the imposition of the modern moral order and talk about transformation as kind of a heroic action, taking a dramatic, bold, radical, heroic action in this life. Kind of a newish take on the Nietzschean will to power. So that triangle forms a really big foundation for Andy's work in this book. He proposes that triangle of a way as kind of diagnosing the ways that these memoirs and narratives of transformation look in our culture, and then he proceeds to go through a bunch of examples of memoirs and plot them out on this triangle, all to build up to kind of the importance of the need to lean into the top angle of the triangle, which is the beyonder angle, which is the preserving a space for the transcendent. And the path of transformation, as Andy puts it in this book, is of, instead of discovering your inner self or heroic action, the path to the transcendent is of surrender and confession. So it's very, I mean, he's at a Lutheran seminary. It does smack a lot of kind of Lutheran, Bardian. There's some Bonhoeffer mixed in there too. It does find itself in that stream of Protestantism for sure, but surrender and confession being the profound path of transformation. And interestingly, he connects that path to some quote unquote secular narratives of transformation, secular memoirs that don't explicitly refer to God, but still go the path of surrender and confession. So that's my attempt to kind of wrangle the main idea of this book in a couple minutes. But it's all about narratives of transformation in our culture that don't refer to God, and the importance of kind of leaning into surrender and confession as a path to towards the transcendent, even in a secular culture. And then, of course, find this last thing I'll say about the main idea. Then, of course, there's a lot about then what then is the task of ministry? What then is the task of the church in this cultural moment? So I'm going to stop my main idea ramblings on that. Hopefully that gives you a good sense of what this book is about. It is the sixth in the six-book series of Ministry in a Secular Age. I wouldn't say you need to read the prior books per se, but I do think that your experience of reading this will be greatly enriched by having the bigger argument in mind that he's laid out already. Okay, so let me go into the next few points. The research behind it, a couple things. I mentioned the German Korean philosopher Han. Deep engagement with Han's work, really, really fascinating. He does a lot, and he does a lot of work also engaging with art, and not just memoirs, but actual visual art and how that typifies some of Han's ideas in our culture. He also does really deep engagement with memoirs themselves. So he's read a lot of memoirs, and he references them. And the ones that I have read, I've read a fraction of the ones that he talks about in this book, but the ones that I have read, I can say he represents them fairly. So like Tara Westover's Educated shows up, for example. Paul Kalanithi, I think I'm saying that right, When Breath Becomes Air is another one. But there's a ton. I mean, he's read a ton. And he brings them all into conversation and plots them out on that triangle I was talking about. But he does deep engagement with them, and he represents them fairly. So that's kind of there's still a lot of that philosopher. And of course, Charles Taylor's in the background too, but he's still a lot of that philosophical cultural theory work is in the background here, and he brings in Byung-Chul Han and engagement with art, and then he brings in all these memoirs. So that's kind of the research behind it. The readability of it is, it's still, in my view, this is still a very readable book. I think the whole Ministry in a Secular Age series walks that line of being deeply philosophical and theoretical in the cultural theory sense, which can be hard to read sometimes. I mean, that genre can be hard to read sometimes, but I find that the Ministry in a Secular Age series generally is much more readable when compared to the works that he's pulling on. I will say, to be fair, this one was a little bit more on the a little bit less readable than some of the others, in the sense that when he's discussing mysticisms, some of that can get very esoteric and abstract when you're trying to wrestle with mysticism, but also in a secularized context. And so there were times when I had to reread some passages and really, really slowly work through it to kind of grasp the argument that he was getting at, I think because of the nature of talking about mysticisms. However, I don't want to overstate that, because overall the book is not very long, the chapters are short, there's a lot of humor, there's a lot of personal reflections, and a lot more personal anecdote in this one, maybe because of the memoir, working with the genre of memoir, he actually incorporates a lot of personal reflections on experiences he's had through COVID, which increase the reliability of the book in those sections as well, I found. And still, like I said, lots of humor. He's a very funny person, very witty. Humor is barbed kind of throughout the writing. So still a bit of a tension between the deep engagement with philosophy and theory and some more readable sections, but I think this one still walks that line. If you found the Ministry and Secular Age books generally readable, this one's pretty close to where those all land. Okay, and then finally my reaction. I've already tipped my hand to how much I appreciate this book, and I do love this book, and I love this series. I really genuinely think this series is must-read material for, I'm a pastor, and I think it's must-read material for pastors in our cultural moment. Particularly, I'm in a very post-Christian, secularized city, secular in the Charles Taylor sense of the word, and this stuff is just so helpful to me. So I want to say just a few things about why I found it so helpful. First of all, I loved that triangle diagram. That's why I spent so much time in the first part of this video on it. I absolutely thought that was brilliant. I could not stop thinking about it after I read it. It was one of those things that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I was applying that triangle map to so many movies or just rhetoric I hear in our culture. I was applying it to all kinds of stuff. That whole transcendent versus inner genius versus heroic action. I think he is absolutely right on with that diagnosis, and I love that tool. So that was a huge plus for me. I'm so glad that he brought that into the whole Ministry and Secular Age series. He even goes through lots of examples of political thinkers, famous like social media, like people like Joe Rogan, social media influencers. He goes through lots of examples and maps them on that triangle, so you can really get your mind around what he's getting at with that, and he's really onto something profound there. So I absolutely love that. I also found some of this book had a bit more of an emotional core to it because of the nature of memoir, I think. And I found some passages when he's pulling on these memoirs and these powerful stories, I found some passages just very moving. And the idea of driving at surrender and confession as the path of transformation in our secular age, it gets an emotional weight to it because of the work he did with these memoirs, I think. So it appealed to the emotions and the affective kind of experience, maybe a little bit more than some of the other books tend to be a little bit more in the head, so to speak, in the cerebral territory. So I love that about it as well. And man, at the end of the day, just like so many other books in this Ministry in a Secular Age series, I put it down and I thought I had more clarity on, okay, with that triangle in this case, here's where the church and here's where my work as a minister, I am tempted to slide down into those corners. I'm tempted to slide into heroic action, to appealing to heroic action, or appealing to discovering your inner genius. I'm tempted in those by our secular malaise. I'm tempted into those corners, and I need to carefully maintain an appeal to that surrender and confession to transcendence at the top. And I was really motivated by the case in this book, inspired by it. My emotions were appealed to. My intellect was appealed to because of the deep engagement with philosophy and cultural theory. And so for me, that's why this book and these books are just a win-win-win. I think they're just a home run in the type of practical theology that Andy Root is doing that I don't really see many other, if anyone else, really doing in the same way. So had a huge impact on my thinking, had a huge impact on even how I'm kind of looking to engage in my work moving forward. I found it to be a genuinely enjoyable reading experience all around, and I'm so glad he capped off the Ministry in a Secular Age series with this work. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on The Church in an Age of Secular Mysticisms by the great Andy Root, a book I absolutely adored, and I would heartily encourage, if you haven't read the Ministry in a Secular Age series yet, just go back and dig into it. There's some great material there for you. And if you love memoirs, this would be an excellent book for you to dig into as well, even on its own merits. So, all right, there you go. Hopefully that was helpful. Those are my thoughts. I would love to know if you have engaged with this book or with any memoirs, or if this subgenre is even something of interest to you. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, thank you for taking some time to watch.